My bookstore, The Gilded Page, doesn't smell like a modern business. It smells of history. It's a rich, layered perfume of aging paper, leather bindings, and the faint, sweet aroma of wood polish I use on the towering oak shelves my father built with his own 2 hands. He started this place in 1958 on a quiet corner of downtown Elmhurst, a corner that was, back then, considered the edge of town. Now, it's prime real estate, a fact my grandson Kevin never lets me forget. For me, these smells are the scent of my entire life. I took my first steps on these well-worn floorboards, learned to read sitting in the worn leather armchair by the biography section, and took over the counter from my father when his hands grew too shaky to work the old brass register. The store is not just a building, it's the vessel of my family's memory, a sanctuary for stories, both on the page and off. Kevin, however, sees only decay. "Grandma, you're sitting on a gold mine," he'd said last Tuesday, striding in with the unearned confidence of a man who's spent 2 years getting an MBA and now believes he understands the world better than someone who has lived in it for 68. He tapped a manicured finger on a stack of first editions, and you're letting it turn to dust, literally. He blew a small puff of air at the books, and a few motes danced in the afternoon sunbeam slicing through the front window. He was all sharp angles and modern fabrics, a stark contrast to the soft, lived-in comfort of the Gilded Page. He didn't see the magic. He saw unmonetized assets. He saw square footage. This property, right here, right now, a developer is willing to offer you $3 million. $3 million, Grandma. Cash, he'd said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were plotting a heist instead of the demolition of my life's work. You could buy a condo in Florida, travel, do whatever it is retired people do. "I'm not retired, Kevin," I said softly, my fingers tracing the spine of a worn copy of Moby Dick. "This is what I do." He sighed, a dramatic put-upon sound that was meant to convey his deep frustration with my stubborn, old-fashioned ways. Running a brick-and-mortar bookstore in the 21st century isn't a job. It's a hobby. A very, very expensive hobby. There's no synergy here, no growth potential. Your Q4 earnings are probably less than what I make on a single stock trade. I didn't know what Q4 earnings were, and I didn't care. My measure of success was different. It was the look on a child's face when they found a book that opened up a new world. It was the quiet hum of a dozen people lost in a dozen different stories on a rainy afternoon. It was the feeling of connecting a reader with an author they'd never heard of, a book that would change them in some small, permanent way. How could I explain that to a boy who saw the world through a spreadsheet? "The store is not for sale," I said, my voice firm, final. He shook his head, a smirk playing on his lips. "We'll see," he muttered, pulling out his phone and tapping furiously. "You can't fight the future forever." As he walked out, the little bell above the door chimed, a sound as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. But for the first time, it sounded less like a welcome and more like a warning. Kevin didn't give up. A few days later, he returned, this time armed with a laptop and a condescendingly patient smile. He set himself up at the small table I keep for customers, clearing away a stack of poetry chapbooks to make room. "Okay, Grandma, let's be logical about this," he began, opening his device. A blindingly bright chart filled the screen. I ran the numbers. Your overhead is astronomical for your revenue stream. Your customer acquisition cost is basically zero, which sounds good, but it means you have no marketing, no outreach. You're just here. You have no market, waiting for people to stumble in. I was busy pricing a new shipment of historical fiction, the feel of the crisp covers a familiar comfort. People know I'm here, Kevin. The Gilded Page is an institution in this town. It's a relic, he corrected, not unkindly, but with the certainty of a doctor diagnosing a terminal illness. Look, I have a proposal, a compromise. He spun the laptop around. It was a mock-up of a website, sleek and soulless, with a sterile white background. thegildedpage.com. We moved the entire inventory online. Use the storefront as a fulfillment center. We can integrate with Amazon. Use targeted social media ads. We'll need to get a point-of-sale system that tracks customer data, of course. Maybe start a subscription box. He spoke a language I didn't understand, a dialect of disruption and data points. He wanted to strip the soul from the store, turn my carefully curated collection into inventory, and my loyal customers into data. And what about the people who like to come in? To browse? To hold a book in their hands before they buy it? I asked, gesturing to Mrs. Gable, a regular who was quietly humming to herself in the history section. Kevin glanced over at the elderly woman and rolled his eyes so subtly he thought I wouldn't notice. The market for that is dying, Grandma. It's a niche, and it's not a profitable one. The future is digital. It's convenient. It's on a screen. His gaze swept across the room, cataloging every flaw. And this place. It's a fire hazard. There's no cafe, no Wi-Fi. You still use a card catalog, for God's sake. It's like a museum. He said the word museum as if it were an insult. I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest. It was the same indignation my father had felt when the first big box chain bookstore opened at the mall, the one that's been closed now for a decade. He had stood right where I was standing, looked at me and said, "Martha, trends come and go, but a good story, well told and well loved, is forever." I straightened my spine. Thank you for the presentation, Kevin. It's very thorough, but my answer is still no. I like my museum. His jaw tightened. He snapped the laptop shut, the sound echoing in the quiet store. Fine, be stubborn. Cling to the past. But don't come crying to me when the roof starts leaking and you can't afford to fix it because you refuse to sell. He stood and loomed over me, his shadow falling across the counter. He lowered his voice, the feigned patience gone, replaced by a sharp cutting edge. Grandma, nobody reads real books anymore. This place is a dusty relic. The sooner you accept that, the better off you'll be. He turned and left, the bell chiming his angry departure. I stood there for a long time, the silence he left behind feeling heavier than ever before. My 69th birthday dinner was a quiet affair, held at my small house a few blocks from the bookstore. It was just me, my daughter Sarah, Kevin's mother, and Kevin himself. Sarah, a gentle soul caught between her mother's traditions and her son's ambitions, tried to keep the peace. She'd baked my favorite lemon cake and filled the house with the scent of roasted chicken. But Kevin had an agenda. Throughout the meal, he kept glancing at a brightly wrapped gift sitting on the side table. It was a long, thin box, and he looked at it with the air of a man who believes he's about to bestow a great and transformative treasure. "I really think you're going to love what I got you, Grandma," he said, interrupting Sarah's story about her garden club. "It's going to change everything." When the time came for presents, he practically leaped from his chair to retrieve it. He placed it in my hands with a flourish. "Go on, open it." I carefully peeled back the paper. Inside was a sleek, black tablet, cold and impersonal to the touch. I turned it over in my hands. It was thin, light, and felt as foreign as a piece of alien technology. I didn't know what to say. "It's the latest model," Kevin announced proudly to the room. "Top of the line. I preloaded it with a few bestsellers for you. See? You just swipe." He took it from my hands and demonstrated, his finger gliding effortlessly across the glass. Words appeared and disappeared with a sterile flick. No more dusty old pages, no more clutter. Thousands of books right in this one little device. He handed it back to me. I stared at the glowing screen, at the crisp uniform font. There was no texture, no history, no soul. It felt like a betrayal of everything I held dear. "Here," he said, his voice loud, performative, as if he were giving a speech. "So you can finally join the 21st century." The words landed like a slap. He didn't just say it to me, he announced it, with my daughter right there as a witness. The implication was clear. I was backward. I was obsolete. My entire life, my passion, my father's legacy, it was all an embarrassing relic that he, the forward-thinking grandson, was magnanimously trying to save me from. I saw the flicker of pain in Sarah's eyes. She knew what he was doing. "Kevin, that's nice of you," she stammered. "But your grandmother loves her books." "Exactly," he said, completely missing the point. "And now she can have all of them without the fire hazard." I felt a profound humiliation wash over me, hot and sickening. It wasn't about the gift itself. It was about the condescension it represented. It was a dismissal of my identity, gift-wrapped and presented with a triumphant smile. He hadn't given me a tablet. He had given me a verdict. He had judged my life and found it wanting. I forced a tight, brittle smile onto my face. I couldn't make a scene. It was my birthday. "Thank you, Kevin," I managed to choke out, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. "It's very modern." I placed the tablet on the table as if it might burn me. For the rest of the evening, it sat there, its dark screen reflecting the warm, soft light of my home, a black hole of progress threatening to swallow my world whole. The week after my birthday was a bleak one. Kevin's words echoed in the quiet aisles of the store, "Dusty Relic, join the 21st century." I found myself looking at my beloved books and seeing for the first time what he saw. Clutter, dust, inefficiency. The tablet sat on my kitchen counter at home, a silent accuser. I hadn't touched it. It was on a drizzly Thursday afternoon that the man came in. The bell chimed softly, and I looked up from my ledger to see a gentleman shaking the rain from a handsome tweed coat. He was perhaps in his late 50s, with kind, intelligent eyes behind a pair of simple glasses and a quiet, unassuming air about him. He didn't pull out a phone or look distracted. He just stood for a moment, breathing in the scent of the store with a look of pure contentment. "What a wonderful place," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "They don't make them like this anymore." My bruised heart felt a little flicker of warmth. "I suppose they don't," I replied with a small smile. "Can I help you find something?" "Perhaps," he said, wandering over to the fiction section. "I'm looking for something specific. I'm not even sure it's still in print. A novel by an author named Alistair Finch. It was called The Last Lighthouse Keeper." I felt a jolt of recognition. Alistair Finch was a brilliant, reclusive writer from the 1940s who had published only 2 novels before disappearing from the literary world. His work was largely forgotten, championed only by a handful of devoted readers. "Mr. Finch," I said, a genuine excitement in my voice. I haven't had someone ask for him in years, a truly underappreciated voice. The man's eyes lit up. "You know him?" "Of course," I said, leading him toward the back of the store, to a section I privately called The Forgotten. It was where I kept books I loved that no one else seemed to remember. His prose is magnificent. He wrote about loneliness in a way that made you feel less alone. We walked down a narrow aisle, my hand trailing along the spines. "I believe I have one copy. My father corresponded with Finch, briefly, before he passed. He always said Finch was the great lost American novelist." I reached up to a high shelf, my fingers finding the familiar cloth binding. I pulled it down carefully. The dust jacket was faded, but the book itself was in remarkable condition. The Last Lighthouse Keeper. I handed it to him. He took it with a reverence that I understood completely. He opened it, his fingers tracing the text as if he were reading Braille. "I read this as a young man," he said, his voice thick with emotion. It shaped me. I've been looking for a copy for years. I thought I'd never find one again." "Some things are worth holding on to," I said, the words aimed as much at myself as at him. We talked for nearly an hour, not as a shopkeeper and a customer, but as two people who shared a deep, abiding love for the written word. We discussed Finch and Hemingway and Cather. He never once mentioned an e-reader or an audiobook. He just talked about stories. When he finally went to pay, he handed me a crisp $100 bill for the $10 book. "Please," he said, holding up a hand when I started to protest. "Consider it a fee for services rendered. You're not just selling books in here, madam. You're curating a legacy." He left his name, Julian, and a business card on the counter, just in case I ever came across Finch's other novel. I tucked it away without looking at it too closely. As the bell chimed his departure, the store felt different. It no longer felt like a relic. It felt like a treasure chest, and I was its keeper. The glow from my conversation with Julian lasted for days. It was a shield against Kevin's barbs, a reminder that my life's work had a value that couldn't be measured on a balance sheet. The bookstore felt vibrant again, its dusty corners filled not with neglect, but with potential and hidden gems. On Monday morning, the phone rang. It was an old rotary phone that sat on the counter, its brash metallic ring a sound from another era. I picked it up. The Gilded Page, Martha speaking. "Martha, good morning. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm calling from Croft Productions in Los Angeles." Her voice was brisk, professional, and radiated an energy that felt 1,000 miles away from my quiet corner of Elmhurst. "Los Angeles?" I asked, confused. I assumed it was a wrong number. "Yes, I'm Julian Croft's executive producer," she continued, as if I should know the name. "He visited your store last week. He bought a book, The Last Lighthouse Keeper." "Oh, Julian." "Yes, the lovely man in the tweed coat. Is everything all right?" There was a brief pause on the line, followed by a light chuckle. "You called him Julian?" "That's fantastic. Ma'am, Julian Croft is one of the most acclaimed film directors in the world." The name suddenly clicked into place. Julian Croft, the director of those sweeping historical epics, the winner of multiple Academy Awards. My mind reeled. The quiet, unassuming man who loved Alistair Finch was that Julian Croft. "Oh my," I whispered, sinking onto the stool behind the counter. "Indeed," Eleanor said. "Mr. Croft was so moved by rediscovering that novel in your store, he's decided he wants it to be his next film. He said he wouldn't have found it anywhere else, that the experience of being in your shop and talking with you was what sealed the deal. He believes the story is a masterpiece, and he wants to bring it to the world." I was speechless. Alistair Finch? A blockbuster movie? "We've already been in touch with Mr. Finch's estate," she went on, her voice a whirlwind of efficiency. "They're ecstatic, but the rights situation is a bit complicated, and frankly, Julian feels a strong moral and artistic connection to you and your store. He sees you as the guardian of the book's legacy." She paused, and I could hear her take a breath, as if preparing to drop a bombshell. "So, we'd like to make you an offer. Croft Productions is prepared to pay you a finder's fee and consultancy payment of $1 million. Furthermore, Julian insists that you be given a credit on the film as an executive producer." The world tilted on its axis. The old brass register in front of me seemed to shimmer. $1 million, executive producer. The words were so foreign, so preposterous, they didn't seem real. But I just sold him a book, I stammered. To Julian, you did much more than that. You preserved a piece of art that was nearly lost. He says you represent the magic of the written word, and he wants that magic to be part of his film. She gave me the name of a high-powered attorney in the city they would pay for to represent me. She told me contracts would be messengered over by the end of the day. When I hung up the phone, the silence of the store rushed back in, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't empty. It was filled with a roaring, thunderous possibility. I looked around at the towering shelves, at the worn armchair, at the dust motes dancing in the sunbeam. A dusty relic, Kevin had called it. He was wrong. It wasn't a relic. It was a vault, and I had just been given the key. I spent the next few days in a daze, speaking with lawyers whose hourly rates were more than my weekly profits, and signing documents that felt like they were from a different planet. The money, a staggering, life-altering sum, was wired to my modest bank account. It sat there, a string of zeros that seemed to hum with latent power. But the true explosion came on Friday. A friend called me, her voice giddy. "Martha, turn on your computer. You're famous." My hands trembled as I navigated to the website of a major national newspaper. And there it was, the headline splashed across their arts and culture section. Legendary director Julian Croft finds next masterpiece in Timeless. Local bookstore. The article was a love letter to the Gilded Page. It quoted Croft extensively. He described the feeling of walking in, the scent of history and devotion, and his conversation with a wise and passionate proprietor who champions the magic of the written word. He called my store a national treasure, a holdout against the sterile tide of digital convenience. The article included a picture of the store's facade, making it look like a still from a classic movie. By the end, there was a brief mention of the production deal, including the producer credit for one Martha Gable. My phone began to ring, and it didn't stop. Local news stations, old friends, distant relatives. The bell on the store's door chimed incessantly as curious townspeople and reporters started to arrive. And then a call from Kevin. His voice was unrecognizable. The familiar, condescending drawl was gone, replaced by a high-pitched, breathless excitement. "Grandma! Oh my God, Grandma, I just saw the news. It's insane. We're trending on Twitter. $1 million? A producer credit? We did it." We. The word hung in the air between us, audacious and infuriating. "Kevin, I'm not sure what you mean by we," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Come on, Grandma. This is what I've been talking about. Leverage. This is the kind of break we needed. I've already been on the phone with my contacts. With this kind of capital and this publicity, we can franchise. We can launch the online brand, a Gilded Page subscription box, branded merchandise. The story is perfect. The old world charm meeting new world success. We're rich. You have to let me handle the business side of this. We could turn this into a $10, $20 million empire." He was panting, intoxicated by a success he had no part in creating. In fact, he had actively tried to destroy its very foundation. He saw the $1 million not as a reward for my life's dedication, but as seed money for his own soulless ambitions. He hadn't learned a single thing. He still saw my store, my life, as a resource for him to exploit. The cold, quiet fury that had been simmering in me since my birthday finally coalesced into a point of icy clarity. "Kevin," I said, my voice devoid of warmth, "we need to talk. Come to the store tomorrow morning. Before I open, absolutely. I'll bring my pitch deck. We're going to be huge, Grandma. Huge," he crowed before hanging up. I stood in the heart of my suddenly famous bookstore, the ringing of the phone a constant chorus. He thought this was his victory, the ringing of the phone. He had no idea it was his judgment day. Kevin arrived the next morning at 9 sharp, buzzing with a manic energy. He wore a crisp suit, as if he were heading to a board meeting, and carried a leather portfolio. He looked completely out of place, standing between shelves of Victorian poetry and classic American novels. "Morning," he chirped, striding toward the counter. "I was up all night working on a 5-year growth plan. Phase 1 is the e-commerce launch. Phase 2 is West Coast expansion." "Stop," I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through his monologue like a shard of glass. He blinked, his mouth half open. "Close the door, Kevin, and lock it." A flicker of confusion crossed his face, but he did as I asked, turning the old brass lock. When he turned back, I was standing in front of him, my hands resting on the worn wooden counter. I felt rooted to the floor, as solid and immovable as the oak shelves around me. "We are not expanding," I said. "We are not launching an e-commerce site, and we are most certainly not franchising." His confident smile faltered. "What? Grandma, don't be crazy. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We have to strike while the iron is hot." "There is no we, Kevin," I said, meeting his gaze. "There is me. There is my store. And there is my money. You have no part in any of it." The color drained from his face. "What are you talking about? I'm your grandson. I'm the one with the business degree. You need me to manage this." "Need you?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "Let's be very clear about what you have done. You came into my home, my life's work, and you called it a dusty relic. You tried to convince me to tear it down, to erase my husband's memory and my father's legacy so you could get your hands on the money. You stood in my living room on my birthday and you humiliated me, telling me I needed to join the 21st century as if my entire existence was an embarrassment to you." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. I quoted his own words back to him. "Nobody reads real books anymore. Isn't that what you said? It seems Julian Croft, a man of considerable influence and taste, disagrees. This fortune, this fame you are so eager to claim a piece of, was born from the very things you despise. It came from the dust. It came from the paper. It came from a deep, abiding knowledge of books that you dismissed as a worthless hobby." He was pale now, stammering. I was just trying to help, to look out for you, to modernize." "You were not helping me," I stated, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "You were helping yourself. You saw me as an obstacle sitting on an asset you wanted. You have never, not for 1 second, respected me, my work, or my intelligence. You just saw an old woman you could easily manipulate." I stood up straight, feeling taller than I had in years. "Well, the manipulation is over. This money, this opportunity, it's not yours to leverage. It's mine, and I know exactly what I'm going to do with it." He stared at me, his eyes wide with a horrified understanding. The ambitious MBA, the master of the universe, was gone. In his place was just a greedy little boy who had been caught and was about to be punished. Kevin stood frozen, his portfolio of plans clutched in his hand like a useless shield. "Punished?" he finally squeaked. "You can't punish me. I'm your family." "Family doesn't treat family the way you've treated me," I replied, my voice hard as iron. "Family doesn't see a loved one's passion as a cash-out opportunity. You built your dreams on the hope of my failure, on the demolition of my life. Now, you'll watch as I build a future on my success." I walked over to my father's old oak desk and picked up a folder. "I met with my new lawyers yesterday. The first thing I did was establish the Gilded Page Literary Trust. The majority of the money from the movie deal will go into it." His eyes widened, a flicker of hope in them. "A trust? For the family?" "No," I said flatly. "A trust dedicated to preserving what you called relics. It will provide grants to independent bookstores across the country that are struggling to survive. It will fund scholarships for aspiring librarians and archivists. And it will ensure that the Gilded Page remains open in this very building, exactly as it is in perpetuity. After I'm gone, the Trust will own and operate it, a permanent landmark. The blood drained completely from his face as the implication of my words hit him. The $3 million property he had been drooling over was now and forever off the table. He would never see a cent from its sale. As for the store itself, I continued, gesturing around the room, I'm going to use some of the money for renovations. I'll fix the roof you were so worried about. I'll restore the original tin ceiling and refinish these beautiful floors. I'm not modernizing, Kevin. I'm preserving. I'm investing in the very dust you so despised. I paused, letting the weight of his lost inheritance settle upon him. Then I delivered the final, most personal blow. You have always assumed you were my heir, that one day all of this, the building, the business, my savings, would pass to you to be liquidated for your soulless ventures. I want to be perfectly clear. My will has been redrawn. You will receive nothing from me, not the store, not my home, not a single dollar. My legacy will be one of creation and preservation, the exact opposite of the destruction you planned for me. He finally broke, his face crumpling. You can't do that, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm your grandson, and I am your grandmother, I said, walking to the door and unlocking it. A grandmother you humiliated and tried to erase. You made your choice when you decided my life was worth less than a condominium. Now you can live with it. I opened the door to the bright morning light. Goodbye, Kevin. He stumbled out in a daze, a ghost in a suit, his grand plans turned to ash in his hands. I watched him go, not with triumph, but with a solemn sense of justice. Turning back into my store, I breathed in the familiar, beloved scent of paper and time. The phone was already ringing. It was Julian Croft, calling from a film set. He wanted to discuss the casting for Alistair Finch. I smiled, a real, deep smile that reached my eyes. The Gilded Page wasn't a relic. It was my fortress. And in this new chapter of my life, I was finally, unequivocally, its queen.